Welcome everyone. We'll get started in a few moments. I just want to give everyone a couple minutes to join. All right, Nancy, if you want to go to the next slide, I think we can get started. So welcome to the Mobility Hub Study Community Meeting. Thank you all for joining. Nancy, you can go to the next slide. Spanish interpretation is available for this meeting. If you'd like to hear the presentation in Spanish, please click on the interpretation globe icon at the bottom of your screen and select Spanish as your preferred language.
Gracias por acompañarnos. Si desea escuchar esta presentación en español, por favor haga clic en el icono de interpretación que está localizado abajo de la presentación y escoja la opción para escuchar en español.
Next slide. Today's meeting is being recorded and the recording will be available on the project website after the meeting. All attendees' cameras have been turned off and the microphones have been muted. Questions can be submitted throughout the presentation by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The team will wait to respond to questions until the end of the meeting during the Q&A session, but please feel free to submit your questions at any time. During the Q&A session, you'll also be able to ask questions verbally by using the raise hand function, which is also at the bottom of your screen. Next slide. I'd like to really quickly introduce our speakers for today. I'm Christina Piricello. I'm the Community Relations Specialist at OCTA and the Head of Outreach on this project. Here with me is Warren Whitaker. He's the project manager for this study at OCTA, along with Alia Verlus, a consultant with OCTA and also a project manager on this study. Next slide. Today, we're going to give you all an overview of mobility hubs and go through some examples of what they can look like, where they can be. We'll also touch on what outreach has been done for this study to date, followed by some poll questions, a Q&A session, and then we'll end it with some different ways that you can stay connected throughout the life of this study. Next slide. Before we dive deep into mobility hubs, you'll see a couple of poll questions pop up on your screen. Nancy, if you want to launch the poll. So the first question is going to be how you learned about today's meeting. So there's a few options: e-blast, social media, word of mouth through like family or friends, text message, newspaper, the OCTA website, or other. You can type in your answer in the Q&A if it was other. And then the second question is if you're familiar with the term mobility hub and generally what they may include. So we've had about 30% respond, so I'll give everyone a couple more seconds before we end the poll.
Christina, we do have a hand that is raised. I think that this might be someone who submitted a question about closed captioning.
Oh, sure. Are we able to turn it on?
Yes, we're getting to that right now.
Cool.
It's available now. So if you wanted to enable it, you can do that at the bottom of your controls.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Yeah, so closed captioning is available. So as Nancy said, at the bottom of your controls, enable it if you'd like that feature turned on. All right, so I'll give everyone a couple more seconds. And Nancy, I think you can go ahead and end the poll. Thanks everyone for your response, and we can go on to the next slide. All right, I'm gonna kick it over to Alia, who's gonna dive deep into what mobility hubs are.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for taking the time to join us today. My name is Alia, and I lead the consultant team for this project. Before jumping in the mobility hub world, I wanted to share with you the background of this project. So as Orange County grows rapidly, a CTA is tasked with creating a transit system responsive to changing user needs and regional demands, and mobility hub can be part of a solution. This project specifically is at the confluence of several ongoing action plans initiatives that OCTA started, from the 2018 OC Transit Vision involvement up to the ongoing 2022 Long Range Transportation Plan. And really the Mobility Hub strategy will help OCTA to bring to life its broader strategic initiative to deliver a better, equitable, and sustainable transit experience, but also anticipate future demands within OC. It is a fast effort, and we have kicked off the project last summer. We're currently working on the local context and the Mobility Hub assessment, and collaboration is going to be a key aspect of this project. We have started engaging with extensive stakeholder meetings, and we're doing, of course, the public engagement through fall 2021. And this meeting, of course, is part of this effort. All the feedback, all the insight that you're going to share today with us will be gathered and feed directly our technical work and help us to develop a network vision, as well as understand what will be the prerequisite components that we would expect to see in different mobility hubs option in the county. The project completion is planned to be late spring 2022, and we're aiming to deliver a mobility strategy that will be directly actionable for the regional, local authorities and mobility operators, but as well as for the communities. And during the project timeline, we also are going to use a website to communicate about the different milestones. And you're seeing the address on this slide, and I'm sure it's going to share again during this presentation. OCTA has also launched a community survey linked to the long range transportation plan, which include questions specifically on mobility hubs. Please help us and have a look at them. And I'm sure that the outreach team will share also a link later today. Next slide, please. So what are we talking about when we talk about mobility hubs? And I've seen that some of you are already familiar with the concept. So hopefully we are going to bring another perspective on this. But to go back for those who are not maybe as familiar with the concept of mobility hubs, it is one that has evolved over time and really transformed from being a hub that was usually associated with public transportation installation and places and transit into something else that could accommodate services, amenities, tech, and conversion to a seamless travel experience. Mobility Hub already exists in different parts of the world, and there were already a lot of interest before COVID-19 happened in the US and elsewhere. But the events of the past 2 years so far have only accelerated the interest and in this kind of solution that are really community focused and are also helping to promote some sustainable solution. We recognize that this is a concept that can mean very different things to different people. And we are currently working on a definition that would fit the OC region. And it's important to highlight different points that will be, common points when we talk about mobility hubs. The first one is the fact that they are places, like concrete places, where different transport mode and service meet to encourage multimodal journeys. And you're seeing here on the slide, it's a bit of a graphic that represents different type of example of modes that could feed into a mobility hubs. You're seeing a bus, of course, that's the biggest one. There's on the right side, some car share parkings. You are seeing as well some bike share and charging station on the left. So really the idea of co-location is very important here. Mobility hubs are also places where people can easily switch between transport services and modes. It means that these places need to be safe, secure, and accessible, and means also, of course, ADA access, wayfinding element to help people navigate around the different options that exist over there. They are also scaled to be create a sense of place, and you are seeing on the right side of the infographic some example of amenities that could be there. So here, I think there's like a little ice cream truck. There's also sometimes lockers, could be Amazon lockers or anything else like that. Again, this is just a very high level picture to show you how it could look like, but everything will be absolutely tailored to the different local context. Next slide, please. So probably at this moment, you are asking yourself, okay, but what are we doing with this? And so this is going to be part of the study to analyze the different options, of course, and make sure that the opportunities are feeding any challenges that the communities in our region are facing. So far, we have identified 4 key ways that Mobility Hub, Mobility Hub could be used in the county. The first really important one is equity, because Mobility Hub can improve accessibility for individuals with limited transport choice or no access to car. The second one is, of course, transit support. Usually a Mobility Hub starts with transit as one of the modes, and they can increase transit ridership, transit flow via the integration of various first and last mile services option. The third one is sustainability, by providing an opportunity to reduce car dependency, but also by encouraging the use of sustainable modes such as shared e-scooters, the bike we were talking earlier, that can of course result in reducing greenhouse emission. The last one is as important than the rest, and it's livability. So it's the idea that we want to be able, through Mobility Hubs, to better integrate transit and create a sense of place for the community. And our team is now working with stakeholders and of course with communities to help us prioritize and refine what are the challenges, what are the opportunities at the regional, at the local levels, which will help us to identify what could be the suitable areas, typologies, but also components that we could see in Mobility Hub. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier, Mobility Hubs are not a one-size-fits-all solution, and all work will therefore focus on identifying at the local level what are the needs, what are the purpose, so that we can tailor the type of component that could go in each of them. But at this stage, we have identified that in general, Mobility Hubs are, as we said earlier, a place where we see co-location of more than one modes. They usually have also a specific branding. So they're easily recognizable when you are walking around in the neighborhood or in main point of interest. They're really there to help with the user experience and facilitate the transit experience. They usually have dedicated spaces for the parking, for the drop zone of the different services. And again, the intention is to create a space for all. So Mobility Hub needs to be safe, they need to be clean, and inviting space for communities together. There is, of course, different numbers of components that needs to be taken into account. And the variability of this depends, of course, on the location and the land use constraint, the availability of the mobility services in the area, but also the community needs. Next slide, please. All right, so from the concept into the example, as I was telling you earlier, there's actually quite a few examples of concrete mobility hubs in the US, but also worldwide. And we're going to spend the next few slides describing some of them so that you have a better sense of the different opportunities and perspectives that they could bring in the communities. So the first example you're seeing on the left side is actually a conceptual design, and it's the illustration of the future Balboa Avenue light rail station in San Diego. If you are a bit familiar with San Diego, it's between the Interstate 5 and the Morena Boulevard. So the mobility hub there is really part of an effort to increase employment and housing opportunities in transit and promote walking and bicycle use as variable travel choices for the communities over there. It's quite an interesting one because I think you can see different type of components in action. You can see that there is different type of modes. There's this little guy on his e-scooters. There's people waiting for the trolley, probably. There's definitely some shared modes, I guess, like use on the right side. There's an e-scooter and a bike parking, as well as, and this is again very important, we're finding elements. So if you have really good eyes, there's a digital platform that you can probably see like on the elevated area. And another example now is on the right side. And here we are in Europe, we are in Berlin, and this is a Jelby station. This is a concrete example. As you can see, this is not anymore a conceptual design image. And this is a concrete example of a mobility hub station that was created by a train stop. If you've been to Berlin, it's by a S-Bahn train stop in Berlin. Here, the focus on the services were really on car share, bike share, moped sharing, e-scooter sharing. There is also some EV charging and some specific stop for the taxis and the on-demand shuttle, which usually is referred as microtransit here. Of course, it means that when the plans were created, it's actually some parking spaces that were removed from the train station to allocate more spaces for this mobility hub. Another interesting thing for this example is that you can actually book any of the vehicle and services that I've just mentioned through an app. So in a certain way, it's an approach that really refers to mobility as a service. And for those who are not really aware of what that means, it's the idea that not only you have an integration of the services, the infrastructure, but at a mobility as a service level, it's also an integration of the type of fare you would want to pay or information on the travel plan. And it's really here to help a seamless journey in between different modes. Next slide, please. So mobility hubs also provide a focal point in a network. And here we have two examples that are actually in the US, so the more local example. Starting with the one on the left, this is the LADOT Warsha Grand Mobility Hub. So for those who are not aware, LADOT began a reflection around mobility hub a few years ago, and they are starting a 3-year pilot program of a network that is going to contain more than 90 different mobility hubs, and they will start that early 2022. But to make sure that they were really, getting further insight before starting the pilot program, they built a first location. So this is the primary hub, if you like, as a pre-pilot. And in this hub, you have different services available. It's not yet open to public because of the recent COVID-19 situation, but it's effectively operational. It is equipped with secure public access room, supporting bike parking, micro-mobility charging. You can also repair your bike. You can prepare a trip, and you have, of course, real-time information about transit departure. Another example on the right, and I think it's one that I really like and appreciate, because so far I've showed you an example of mobility hubs where they are created. This example is a retrofit example. So this is a Caltrain bike station in San Francisco, and it is, a standalone building adjacent to one of the main San Francisco station entryway. It has been in operation since 2008, and what it used to do is to provide secure, valid bike parking for privately owned bicycle. And so, really recently, with the growth of ride sharing with micromobility, the bike station has seen a decline in the daily numbers of bike park, and the Caltrain board approved a change of scope for the place, and they authorize an operator to actually pilot a micromobility valet park and charge pilot program, and to turn this place into a mobility hub. Now the station can also allocate bike parking services, e-scooter station. It's also a FlixBus ticket vendor. So there's way more services than before. Next slide, please. So another interesting perspective into mobility hub is that they can be physical, they can be digital, but they can also integrate fare, and all of that can create a framework within it. You can understand what a mobility hub could be. And I'm going to start with the right side, actually, the Minneapolis mobility hubs. It's quite an interesting one. And if you've not heard about it, Minneapolis has actually started a pilot program. They have around 25 what they call mobility hub in the city, with the aim to increase access to low and non-carbon transportation option, but also, of course, to improve the access to transit. And here, I wanted to share this example with you to show you some example of physical design elements and wayfinding. As you can see, there is clear branding. It's very blue. You can't see the logo, I think, on this picture, but it has also a very recognizable logo for the general public. There is also a very, an attention on the location and where they are and how they've been picked. And each of the area has a specific totem pole that really is here to remind people of the different option and how all things work. Why I find this example very interesting is also because they, through public awareness, started to promote, the mobility app within advertisements, in the street poster, on public transport, on social media, but also through community ambassador. And this is an example on the right side, the person you're seeing currently, I think she's adding some flour. Community ambassador are super important for Mobility Hub. In the case of Minneapolis, they provide education around the hubs. They help with the maintenance. They provide information on the low-income programs to use for certain modes like the bike share, the scooters, but also some car share options. They are working with the communities. They are working with local groups. They are working with school to create safe spaces for young and for eldest. They are also really engaged in making sure that ambassadors are recognizable face in the neighborhoods. And one example that I find really interesting is that they have a lot of translator that speak Somali, because some of the neighborhoods in Minneapolis, and specifically neighborhood like Cedar Riverside, are known for a high representation of Somali's diaspora. And so they really want to make sure that everyone is included and that they have access to all the services and options and opportunities that it can create. The example you're seeing on the left side is a Mobi Kiosk. And this is here to illustrate what I was talking earlier about. So basically the transition between physical and digital integration. And here, what you can see is that through a mobility kiosk, which is operated by a company called Transito, people have access to a digital integration application. They can plan the trip from point A to point B. They can see different routes. They have information on real-time transit information. They can book, they can pay for shared mobility rides along the city streets and rail station. Next slide, please. So hopefully with the different example, as well as more information about the projects and where we are trying to go with the team, we hopefully have given you more ideas of what a mobility app can be, what are the opportunities, and really welcoming any questions you might have, and really looking forward to the discussion we'll have later. Up to you, Christina.
So over the next few slides, we'll be going through some of the poll questions. We'd really like to get your feedback on what you'd like to see in mobility hubs and where you'd like to see them. So please answer the polls if you can. Next slide. And Nancy, go ahead and pop up the first poll question. So the first poll question is a two-part question. You're going to select the #1 service that you would like offered at mobility hubs. On-demand shuttle services, so like OC Flex, delivery parcel lockers like rideshare, Uber, or Lyft, e-bike share, e-scooter share, car sharing like Zipcar or Get Around, and then there's others. So you can type your answer in the Q&A. Unfortunately, for those on the phone, obviously you can't type your question into the Q&A. So if you have an additional item you'd like to add, you can go ahead and talk about that during the Q&A session. And then the second question is kind of the same, but it's asking for your #2 option, and the selections are the same. So on-demand service like OC Flex, delivery parcel lockers, rideshare, Uber or Lyft, e-bike share, e-scooter, car sharing, Zipcar, and Get Around. And I'm gonna give everyone a couple seconds. It looks like we're at about 34%, so I'll give you guys some time. And if you can't see the second question, just go ahead and scroll down. And we're about at 60%, so I'll give you all a couple more seconds. It looks like a lot of you would like to see on-demand shuttle services, so that's good to know. All right, a couple more seconds. We're at about 65%, so if you haven't gotten your answers in, go ahead and get those in. Okay, Nancy, I think we can go ahead and move on to the next poll. All right, so the next poll question you'll see is kind of in a different format. You're gonna rate how important these services and amenities are to you. And once the poll pops up on the screen, then I'll read off the answers to you. So Nancy, go ahead and launch the next poll. Okay, so the first one is storage lockers for luggage or package delivery. You're gonna rate the importance of that to you. So not important, not very important, kind of neutral, somewhat important, or very important. The second question, if you scroll down, is gonna be secure bicycle parking with the same answer. The third is gonna be bicycle repair stand or station. The fourth will be availability of staff at the transit station. And then the fifth is gonna be bathrooms. Sixth is seating in open space. Seventh is dining options, so like food trucks, carts, vending machines, kind of like you saw in the graphic that Alia showed earlier. Eight's gonna be security features, so that includes like cameras, lighting. Nine's ATM machines. And 10 is USB charging stations. So I know it's kind of a long question. You have to scroll down a little bit, so I'll give you all some time. Now we're about at 25% right now. And we're at about 50%, so give everyone some more time. And we'll give everyone like 2 or 3 more seconds. I know it's kind of a long question. Okay, Nancy, I think we can end this poll and move on to the next one. All right, so the last poll question you're gonna see is also gonna be a 2-part question like the first one we had, but this is gonna be related to the location of mobility hubs. So you're gonna select the number 1 location where you'd like to see mobility hubs, and then you'll select your number 2 location where you'd like to see mobility hubs. So the first question, what is your number 1 preferred location for where mobility hubs should be placed in Orange County? The first answer option is at employment centers. The second is near residential areas. The third is educational facilities like universities, colleges, at bus stops or stations, at neighborhood shopping centers, at rail stations or stops, at major visitor destinations. So those can include like amusement parks, shopping malls, fairgrounds, the beaches. And then this also has an open-ended. So if there's something else we didn't include, please type it in the other box. And if you're on the phone and don't have an option to do that, please feel free to bring it up during the Q&A session. And then again, question number 2, if you scroll down, is your second preferred location with the same answer options. And we're at about 50%, so I'll give you all a little bit more time. Couple more seconds. We're at almost 70%.
We did get another category that was at medical facilities such as hospitals, clinics, and doctor offices.
Awesome. Thank you for that feedback, guys. That's exactly what we're looking for. All right. I think we can go ahead and end this poll. Haven't had anyone answer in a couple of seconds. So Nancy, go ahead and go to the next slide. So before we jump into the Q&A, I just want to briefly go over some of the outreach we've done to date. So for this meeting and about this study, we've sent out electronic notices, so like e-blasts. We've done some social media advertisements. We had a text message campaign that went out, some newspaper advertisements that were joint with the long-range transportation plan that Alia talked about. We also have a website dedicated to this project. So the team at some point will share that link in the chat. It'll also be on the last slide of this presentation. We've also posted organically on some of the social media platforms that OCTA has and sent out a toolkit to cities and other organizations. We'll also be hosting a roundtable for some community-based organizations coming up within the next few weeks. And then as Alia alluded to earlier, there's also a long-range transportation plan survey going on right now, and there are a handful of Mobility Hubs questions in that survey. So I encourage you all to take it. It'll also be dropped in the chat at some point. Next slide. Okay, so we are at the fun part. We're at the Q&A, we'll take the rest of the meeting to take any questions you have or any comments. The team will read off questions that are already in the Q&A box, but you can also add more. Again, it's at the bottom of your screen. Participants can also raise their hand. So if you'd like to ask a question verbally, just raise your hand also at the bottom of your screen. And when you're called on, please unmute yourself and ask your question. If you're calling in on the phone, you're going to want to press *9 on your phone's keypad to raise your hand, and you'll be called on by the last 4 digits of your phone number. So listen out for that. Once you're called on, you'll press *6 to unmute yourself, and you can go ahead and give your comment or ask your question. So we can start taking comments.
And I wanted to jump in. Well, before I jump in and answer Dave's question, I wanted to first of all thank everyone for joining us this evening. And I think, like Dennis thanked us, we want to thank you guys for being
Absolutely.
here tonight and participating, and Ivan for sharing that comment. So Dave raises a good question here. What's the time frame? Because it seems like that would definitely impact what technologies that you'd include in facilities. But in fact, they're specifically designed to be flexible over time. And Alia kind of indicated how we've already seen some examples where there's stations that have been retrofitted for changing technology or changing uses or changing services over time. So we definitely see it as, whatever strategy that Alia hands off to me at the end of this, that'll be a starting point, and it'll need to evolve over time as the technology changes, as the service changes, and what different partnerships we have in these going forward. So, what suite of services and technology and how it connects the community may be very different from like the Irvine Metrolink station to a park and ride facility in Fullerton. So we would see them be very different. So the technology and what are the key elements would be, should reflect what the community needs are, what the services are, the things that Ollie already hit on the previous slide. So I think it's this opportunity to kind of custom fit each one and custom fit them over time.
Thank you, Warren. We have a hand raised from Dennis Bress. So Mr. Bress, if you can unmute yourself, that would be great.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. What a great opportunity to be able to give some input back to you guys. And like I said in the chat, thank you for your hard work. I received the text in your social outreach. Also received, I believe, email, and already filled out one of your questionnaires, basically what we just went through. So your outreach is working. I don't know if this is, it's long-term more or less, but it does fall in line with what we're advocating for, and that is for using the boring technology from Elon Musk's company, the Boring Company. You see the success that they've had out in Las Vegas for the Las Vegas Convention Center, but basically looking to do a feasibility study to get a connection from the Anaheim Arctic out to Ontario Airport. Which then would relieve a lot of the pressure that's being put on John Wayne Airport currently. So, we've already invested a lot in the Anaheim Arctic, right, as a key piece within the transportation of Orange County process in order to get more people to get to a location to not have to use cars, right? And the other piece to that is from the Arctic, you have access to the mobility center. If we built that out based on the concepts you guys are talking about here, but more importantly, to extend that out long-term to be able to get people from Orange County not to have to get in their cars to come all the way from Fullerton, Brea, Yorba Linda, Placentia to John Wayne Airport, but to be able to go to Anaheim Arctic and then take the Boring Company tunnel out to Ontario, which is only 33 miles as the crow flies. And we estimate, based on the cost of the Boring Company, at $10 million a mile. OCTA is spending $100 million per mile for the Orange County above ground OC streetcar. That's $400 million for 4 miles. The Elon Musk, the Boring Company, is $10 million per mile. So for 2 tunnels, we're talking about a investment of close to $660 million to be able to have a connection from the Anaheim Arctic out to Ontario. So all of this fits together. What you guys are talking about is phenomenal. One more piece would be to use the riverbed for the Santa Ana riverbed as a connection point that all cities on both sides via mobility centers could then interconnect into. And then using scooters and bikes, we could traverse a large distance of Orange County all the way from at the end of the river trail, all the way up to Anaheim and then beyond. So all of the things you guys are talking about are fantastic and forward thinking. And all of these things will help us, along with and we all have experienced this during the last summer in Newport, is that a lot of people now have purchased these e-bikes and are finding them to be wildly successful. If you see posts on Nextdoor, there's safety concerns, right? Because now you're not so much pedaling, you're on like an electrified bicycle. But the point is, people are using them now to be able to get out and not have to use their cars to be able to get out and shop, go to the doctor, etc. So all of this interconnects, and I really appreciate the time. And those are just some of my thoughts and inputs back to you guys as you do what you have to do.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Warren, do you have anything on that?
No, I definitely value the input. Just real quick on kind of point of comparison between the two and the cost differential. You only really have 2 access points with the tunnel, Ontario and Arctic, versus the streetcar. You have continuous access along the entire alignment. Things that would be important for when we think about who we're providing accessibility for. But the tunnel technology that the Boring Company has demonstrated is really important as we're looking at solutions long term. But definitely appreciate those thoughts and yeah, e-bikes. Alia indicated some of the potential elements that would be in there, and the need for e-bike share may be a little bit different in certain parts, especially in the coastal communities where there's a heck of a lot of personal ownership of e-bikes, and as you acknowledge, there's a lot of different safety concerns that will be part of the public dialogue about how we make sure that our roads are safe for all users.
Thank you, Warren.
Great, thanks.
We can go on to the next question, Maria.
Thank you. The next question is from Justin Wong. What kind of restaurants will there be at mobility hubs? So it looks like Justin is looking forward.
Yeah, you name it. So again, I think it depends on what kind of mobility hub we're looking at. And I think, this almost goes a little bit to Ivan's comment. There could be a whole network and clustering of mobility hubs. And I think it maybe even goes to Dennis's point where, you may have ones that are like LADOT's example, where they may be the prime location and they may have more amenities. And there may be ones that are more satellite that don't have quite as many services. They still have connections, but they maybe not have that full suite, and it's whatever the community needs. So, and recall too that OCTA doesn't own and control a lot of these lands where the mobility hubs would be. So it would need to be in partnership with the property owner, the local jurisdiction that's involved. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to provide a lot of connections and a lot of great new dining opportunities.
Thanks, Warren. Next question, Maria.
Yes, and this is a follow-up from Dave Gallen. Warren, would that technology include the flexibility to include the infrastructure needs of autonomous vehicles and vertiports to handle urban air mobility vehicles and their EV charging needs?
Well, I don't know that I can say a lot about urban air mobility just because it's so new in terms of how that will evolve. I don't know on that as much. One of the concepts with autonomous vehicles is that they would never even need to park. So they might not ever need to park at a mobility hub. They may need to use a mobility hub or similar type location to charge, depending on how the charging infrastructure or their battery life is. So, that would be something that, we'd be needing to look at how that evolves in terms of even how that market evolves. Again, on urban air mobility, that's one of those things that, we in a lot of our planning concepts, we've looked at that as an idea, but it's something that hasn't become concrete enough that we can get our arms around fully to say, this is exactly how we're going to handle it. And that's why planning is so exciting, because you have to keep on updating it because new things come up. There's new policies, new technologies, new ways of how we respond to the infrastructure and to the technology. And so, yeah, it's part of a ongoing conversation that we get to have going forward.
Warren, I'd like to add some few words on this one. Absolutely, mobility hubs are definitely a place where we could see autonomous vehicle for the use case that Warren described, really as a pickup zone. And this is one of the use cases that have been developed the most recently when people are, thinking about the future of mobility hubs. I would say that working on AV, let's first focus on electrification of fleet. It's probably, the shortest timeline we will see. Mobility as a service, for us to be in a situation where all the cars are autonomous and they use mobility apps. We're not there yet. Probably they will start by shared microtransit option, maybe OC Flex in a few years. But in any cases, if you remember the components that Mobi have, the drop-off and pick-up zone is one of the most fundamental one. Just something to add as well on urban air mobility. And unless we have proper regulation on how these new services are going to, fly around us, currently it's definitely more on the futuristic scenarios than the short-term, mid-term ones. But again, it's the idea to have it up, and let's say you have some close by airports, it's doable on the technology's point of view. Of course, then planning policy, community needs and interest are going to influence the choice and mode and services.
Great. Thanks,
Thank you, Alia. The next question is from Ruby Nuez, and Ruby is thinking partnerships. So as the program evolves, would it be possible to collaborate with family resource centers throughout the county to get clients connected, not just to services offered out of our family resource centers, but also with agencies we partner with?
Yeah, so I can take that question. Typically OCTA does partner with places like family resource centers, educational facilities. Like right now we have the College Pass program where college students are getting bus passes included as part of their tuition. So definitely as mobility hubs are created in the future, that is something that OCTA would look at, is building partnerships with the communities that these hubs are going into. That's very important to us and definitely something we'll be looking at.
Perfect, thank you. And this next question is from Mike Davis, and Mike is wanting to know about funding. Do you anticipate funding or grant opportunities for cities for mobility hub elements in the future?
I think that's a great idea. We don't have a pot of funding right now that's dedicated to this. I mean, this is really kind of a start of the conversation and start of looking at how mobility hubs might work for Orange County. But if you take a preview to what's going on in San Diego County, yes, that's definitely the direction that they've evolved into, where they did something like we're doing now many years ago and kind of evolved that. And so now it's into a specific grant program. So quite possibly that is where the future will go. But we have some time before we get there.
If I may add, part of this work and the strategy we are building will include some funding recommendation as well. So it is part of the strategy to start the thinking about it.
Thank you. And this next question is from Reem Hashim, and it's relevant to the comment we had on tunnels earlier. And it's that sounds like a great idea. I think tunnels should be used to connect OC and Riverside County, mainly to Corona. Is there a timeline for this tunnel?
So there's actually on the OCTA website from one of the previous previous studies. I don't remember the exact URL to get you to that, but if you look at studies and previous studies, OCTA has looked at a number of different tunnel options into Riverside County. The technology and the cost for that at the time wasn't feasible. The work with the boring company may at some point make that more feasible. There's no plans on the books to have a tunnel at this time. So.
Thank you. And I'm just going to make a plug here. If you, we don't have any hands raised at the moment, but if you do want to raise your hand and make a comment verbally, please use the raise hand function. And this next comment is from John Davini, and I apologize if I didn't pronounce it correctly. And it's the never-ending question of who has the responsibility for ongoing maintenance of the infrastructure at a mobility hub. And it's a multi-part question. Mm-hmm. Is it a shared responsibility between OCTA and the local government? Is there an opportunity for private businesses, such as a bicycle repair and sales stores, to be part of the hub or next to it? And lastly, a cluster of bike stores next to a public square in a city center with transit center may be a potential location to consider.
Great. I'm gonna take a first stab at it, and I'm gonna probably ask Ali to talk about some international examples on that. So just kind of recognizing the land use control and land use ownership in Orange County. Like I indicated earlier, there's only a few locations that are completely controlled by OCTA. So, some of those locations, you could see that it'd be O&M, all of that would be controlled by OCTA. If it's on, say, the Irvine Metrolink station, City of Irvine would be their facilities. So then they may either partner with us on how we maintain it, or they may actually go out to bid and have someone else do that. There's a lot of different financing and funding options that could be applicable to this. I think you alluded to some opportunities to have some shared ways of doing that. And then Ali, I can talk about some international examples where there's all kinds of different ways to make this work.
It's literally about that. So, name one, it exists. Either it's owned by a regional or local body, and maintenance is, depending on, of course, the land use and responsibility of the authority, be managed this way. Downside of it is, of course, maybe less space for a lot of different mobility options to be part of. It's more regulated, I would say. There is example, especially more, I think, in Germany and on the, Austria and Europe, where mobility apps can be managed completely by the private sector. And when I say manage, it means from the design, the maintenance, the operation, all the elements of it through any form of public partnership contracts, it exists. Again, there's always a downside and a good side depending on, where the funding is needed to be, type of technology that will be implemented. There's also, we just mentioned the mobility operators. I think we recognize that a mobility ecosystem is way larger than that. We need to think about utilities. It's definitely one of the main important points. Data sharing and any form, especially when we go for more, futuristic services. The network and access to the network is going to be paramount. The beauty, I would say, and there's also example in the US, but the beauty of mobility app as of now is that you can completely it's completely flexible on the governance process. And to answer some of, I think, a part of your question, yes, hopefully, private operators with, bike share, bike repair operators, bike shop, or any form of alternative transportation will be part of the conversation, and we will make sure so to understand what are their needs and how could mobility apps represent opportunities and challenges for them. So it's really an open conversation, and what really matters is the level of, I think, regulation and responsibility that the agency that is launching the hub is having. And it's definitely collaborative with cities. If it's owned by the regional body, if it's at a city level, it's less a network. It might be just a few pilots. And as I said, sometimes it is completely managed and owned by the private sector through public-private partnership. Hopefully this is answering the question, but
thank you, Alia. Yes,
thank you.
Very good, great comments. We do have a hand raised from Ivan Cortez. Ivan, if you can unmute yourself, that would be great. And you can make your comment.
Hello, everybody. I work a lot with people with disabilities, and one of the issues that I encounter is accessibility with people that are blind. I can go back to when COVID started, how if a bus was full, it would say bus is full, the next one will approach soon. So how does, can you guys make it more accessible for people that are blind at these substations? Even crossing the traffic light, I know it gets hard for them. So that's all I'm asking, if you guys can make things a little bit more accessible for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. I might take this one quickly from Ivan. I think this is a super important topic. It is paramount and essential. It is in the vision of what a mobility hub should be. It should be accessible for all. So, ADA access is going to be part of any form of guideline and design that we will come up with for any form of prototype of typologies. There's also actually interesting example, and there's one that I, remember now in the UK of wayfinding specifically designed for people who can't see or any form of disability. So there's different options that exist, and I think here it's really about the wayfinding work, the design work, but also just generally the guideline aspect to take into account. So it is one of the key important elements of the work we're doing, and we have that in mind. It's an important aspect. Warren, do you want to say something else?
Yeah, I would just add on that, a big part of mobility hubs is tying it in, especially these transportation connections, better into the community. And so almost a key part of that is looking at how someone would walk or bike, makes those crossings, and sometimes even, in order to accommodate the different uses, you may have a transit location or a transit stop that's a little bit far away, that you may have to do some kind of actual physical movement to get to the next service. And so being able to make those connections safely, having a secure environment, having a welcoming environment, those all become important design aspects that need to be considered to make that mobility hub successful.
Thank you, Warren. We have a comment from Reem Hashim, and the comment is, tunnel technology is being used all over the world, like the English Channel in Canada, the US underwater tunnels, and LA Metro is using that technology for subway systems despite earthquake dangers. So I feel it's time for OC to employ such mass scale improvements to traffic conditions and bottlenecks.
Yeah, thanks for the input. We don't have a specific project that we're trying to tunnel for right now, but we will keep that in mind and look for opportunities for it to address issues that we have going forward.
Thank you. And the next question is from Cecile Burke, and switching gears a little bit, she's asking about bicycle lanes, and her question is, what plans are there to create barriers between bike lanes and traffic in areas that have numerous bicycle-related deaths? And she's pointing to PCH, Newport Coast Drive, and Superior Avenue in Costa Mesa as examples. Everyone seems aware there's a problem, but I never hear about any useful solutions.
Yeah, no, that's a great issue, and I think we heard a little bit earlier about e-bikes and especially both the proliferation of e-bikes and potentially some users, especially younger than 16, that are using it, and some worries about that. So ignoring the the different age of users, one of the biggest reason or biggest factors in both pedestrian and cyclist deaths versus via collision with a car is vehicle speed. And so if we can do things to address the vehicle speed, and there's been some state legislation that gives cities more ability to change the traffic speed rather than just base it on the predominant speed. So that's, you may have heard something like 85th percentile. That goes into an ability to control how fast vehicles are going on local roads and set them accordingly, and then being able to enforce them. So that's one aspect to it. The other is there's something called protected bike lanes. They're called Class 4 facilities if you talk to some of the engineering folks. And that's where, rather than just having the striped bike lanes that we have on streets, it actually provides a barrier between the bike lane and the vehicle travel lane. sometimes those can be a challenge because you may, in order to squeeze that in, you may have to take a travel lane. And I think, you know, a number of the people on the call may be familiar with what happened in the West Side in LA when a project like that kind of went into effect, took away a travel lane, and huge public uproar, outroar on that. I don't know that that many local cities. There are some cities that are entertaining that, but it can be a challenge. And the other thing that you reference here is like PCH, where it's a Caltrans facility. So there's need for coordination amongst different agencies. That even though it's you know, it's flowing through a lot of cities, it's still in large part controlled by Caltrans. So some of it is the different partnerships as well. But you know, we're fully committed to ensuring that our transportation system is as safe as it can be. So you know, we commit to continuing to work on everything that we can to make sure that people both start their trip and arrive at the end of their trip safely.
Thank you, Warren. We do have a multi-part question from Susan Ambrose. And the first question is, have you contacted city governments and asked them to ask their public works departments and planning and transportation commissions or committees to take the survey? That's the survey that we discussed earlier, LRTP survey. A good overview of the city, local needs and perceptions are as you review responses from South Orange County to North, East, and West Orange County. This input would be valuable to determine what kind of mobility hub might be most useful to a city and the communities around. And then the same for asking, for asking the cities and chambers of commerce, boards and members to bring this input to directly from business leaders, owners, and employees who all have customers and their colleagues at store services at times. So valuable input could be gathered here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I can take
go
that.
Ahead. Yeah, please.
So yeah, we do put together toolkits with all the information on the Mobility Hub study, the LRTP survey, really any study we're conducting at OCTA, and we do send them out to, you know, cities, Chamber of Commerces for them to distribute to who they see fit within their organization. We also are conducting separate roundtables outside of this one, you know, that's open to the public with community-based organization groups, some other agencies like Caltrans, Metrolink, et cetera. And we also will be doing another stakeholder roundtable with some of the larger players like large employers, hospitals, people like that. So yes, we have been doing outreach to them and getting their feedback as well.
And I think we could also indicate too, I'm also a project manager on the South Orange County multimodal transportation study, of which mobility hubs are one of the elements there. And we've done some pretty extensive outreach, both with all the South County cities, and that's covering from the 55 south to the county line, as well as business groups and a number of outreach activities. And for both this study and the LRTP, we're kind of more on the earlier side of the outreach. So we're going to be continuing, like Christina said, to do those as we go forward.
Thank you, Warren. And this question is from Kathy Stewart, and her comment is, we need more miles of safe, dedicated bike and the like trails for bikes, e-bikes, scooters, pedestrians, etc. These need to be separated by concrete barriers so bicyclists don't get killed. We already have many bike paths along many roads, but they are not safe.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the comment. We also have an ongoing study that actually looks at replicating the OC loop, which you may know of in North County, that uses a number of off-road facilities plus some different connectors. Tries to look at opportunities to replicating that in both Central and South County, as well as having a cross-county connector that would essentially run through the middle. and kind of look at opportunities for that. But a lot of this is about how cities are trying to manage their roads. And we see some agencies that are already starting to jump forward on that and kind of reallocate their road space. So they're providing more safe and opportunities for cyclists. And it's going to be ongoing work. I mean, we have the system that we have today that's basically over 100 years of planning for the automobile. It's going to take us a little bit of time to undo those 100 years of work. I know some of the communities are a lot newer, but you know, it takes time to kind of transition to what the needs are as we transition to whatever that new phase is, and including some of the new technology that others have indicated, and how we do that to make everybody safe.
Thank you. And Christina, just doing a quick time check. We are at 6:37, so just wanted to make sure that we are good to continue answering some of these great questions.
Yeah, it seems like we only have one more. So I think we can take that last question and then we can move on to the next slide and wrap it up. And I'll say this again at the end of the meeting, but if there's anything you didn't get the opportunity to ask, or you think of something later that you'd like to share, all of our information will be available on the last slide and is available on the project website. You are welcome to email us or call us at any time.
Thank you. And Dennis Bress, we will send you the information you requested. So that'll be coming to you. And this last question that I have is from John Devney. And the question is, do you have examples of consistent branding for a mobility hub when multimodal transportation services are provided by different agencies and operators? Have you considered using other terms than mobility hubs that the general public would understand in plain language? Mobility hub is technical jargon for transportation planners that many people may not understand. What other names have been used elsewhere?
I can have a go at this one. The answer is absolutely yes. And we are really aware of the fact that it's very technical. Again, at this stage, we are at the strategy level, not at the implementation level. By the time we arrive at the implementation level, this will not be called a mobility app probably anymore. There's quite a few good examples, I think more in Europe right now that I've seen in the US. Some mobility apps are called Mobi, which, you know, I guess is still close to mobility. And I have to say, probably because it's transportation, most of these, you know, hubs have kind of like a city or mobility or transportation, either pun or play of word kind of names. They also have unified branding, and that means specific color codes that is not taking into account, you know, necessarily the transit agency ones or the e-scooter or any form of like private operators one. And I think, John, you asked the question. If you don't mind, you know, sending your email, I'm very happy to share with you some concrete example. I have like probably a dozen in mind, but we are really late in this conversation. But I'll be happy to share with you example of concrete branding exercise that is currently being done in the UK, in Germany, in France, and also just good example. I think the Minneapolis one is really good here in the US.
Thank you, Alia. And we do have one final question from Cecile Burke. And the question is, can we create a mobility hub that includes Orange County Airport? Currently, there's almost no public transit to and from the only major county airport. Other cities have bus and light rail to access airports. There's almost no transit to and from Tustin Metrolink, and too little infrequent to both Santa Ana, Irvine Amtrak stations.
Yeah, I definitely recognize the challenges there, and that's I agree with you. I happen to be one of the people who lives close to one of the bus lines that actually provides direct access to John Wayne. So I feel fortunate that I actually can take a bus to the airport. But I definitely hear you. Having seen people who take Amtrak and then like, wait, how do I get to the airport now? Versus, oh no, you have to then switch over to Metrolink to get to Tustin so you can get closer and then jump on the iShuttle. So I get you. Yeah, definitely. I agree.
And if I can add, part of the work is going to actually identify, through a suitability map, point of need for mobility hubs, because it will be based on the destination. I absolutely think that airport will show. So, thank you for the inputs. This is definitely something we are looking at.
All right, I think we can wrap up the Q&A. Thank you everyone for your feedback. It's really appreciated. As I mentioned before, if there's anything at all that you didn't get the opportunity to say or ask, please feel free to reach out to Warren or myself. Our contact information is on the screen. Also, all of our contact information is available at the project website, which is octa.net/OC Mobility Hubs. You can go on to the next slide. And that is it. So as we said before, there were some links dropped in the chat, for project documents like the fact sheet, our project website, along with a link to the LRTP survey that we encourage you all to take. Again, just want to echo a big thank you to everyone for joining, and thank you for your feedback. It's really appreciated, and we hope you have a great night.